Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bible Book by Book. In this video cast we look at a particular image or a particular picture we find in Scripture, in the Bible, and we try to just understand it a little bit, asking the question of what do we need to know about the culture, or is there something we need to know about what was happening in that time. And today I want us just to look at a phrase that we find in the book of Revelation chapter 21. And it says this. It says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea." Now, I don't know about you, if you've ever read that passage before, I, as a surfer, become quite concerned when I read passages in the Bible that says, when you get to heaven, friends, you aren't really going to be able to do the thing you love, surfing. Water sports are not welcome in this new heaven. God is getting rid of the water sports, which also says to me, if there's no longer any sea, there's no longer any beaches, which also means there's no longer any walks along the beach. I start to now obviously we can't judge heaven upon what we understand it's going to look like. It's not just going to be another version of earth, it's going to be something different. But, the point being, why does it say there'll be no more sea? What's wrong with the sea? Why are we getting rid of seas? Why does it not say there's no more volcanoes? And I just want us to think about that for a moment. Why does it say there's no longer any sea? Well, the actual word here in the Greek behind the word sea is the word abyss, a large body of water. And I just want to partner that passage up with a couple of others. I just want us to look at Jonah. Jonah, God asks him to go to Nineveh, decides he's going to go to Tarshish, the total opposite direction. A storm comes while he's in this boat, travelling, and it says this. This is Jonah chapter 1, verse 11. "The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, 'What should we do to you to make the sea calm down upon us?'" Or calm down for us, sorry. He says, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea." The word that we have behind that word in the original Hebrew also is the word abyss. And it says that they end up throwing him into the abyss. Jonah goes into the abyss, and a large fish, it says, comes and swallows up Jonah. And then Jonah is in the belly of the fish for 3 days, and then gets spewed out onto the beach. Jonah dies in the abyss, is brought through the abyss onto the other side, where he's now spewed onto a beach. Now, there's a whole load of things I want us to look at with regard to that Jonah story at some other point in another Bible book podcast. But here is the sea, and Jonah's thrown into it, and death is brought about. One last passage I want us to quickly glance at and mention is this one. This is John chapter 6, and it says in John chapter 6, "The evening had come, and the disciples had gone down to the Lake Galilee. They got into the boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum, but now it was dark, and Jesus had not joined them." And it says in verse 18, "A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they were around 3 or 3.5 miles into the lake, they saw Jesus approach the boat, walking on the water." He's walking on the Sea of Galilee. Now, what do we need to know about large bodies of water? What you need to know is this. In the Jewish consciousness, large bodies of water were this abyss. In other words, hell. When people fell into the water, they very often died. Their bodies would sink to the bottom. Therefore, there was this belief that large bodies of water and oceans were where death was. And actually, large bodies of water were also where gods were worshipped. And Baal was worshipped as a fertility god at the ocean, at the sea edge, in water. And the belief was when there was a raging storm, that one of the ways of dealing with the storm was to throw an offering into the water. So Baal, who later becomes known as Beelzebub, later becomes known as Satan, he's attached to these large bodies of water. Remember the story where we're told that Jesus casts out demons out of pigs, and they jump off the cliff edge and they go and drown themselves in the abyss, in the sea, in the ocean, Lake Galilee. They go and die in hell, essentially, is what the writer of the passage understood. They've gone and jumped and killed themselves in hell. So when Jesus comes walking on water, because large bodies of water were seen as this abyss, as hell, as death, when Jesus comes walking on water, is essentially showing that he has power over hell. Hell does not have power over Jesus. Jesus is able to walk on hell. In fact, Jesus not only can walk on hell, he can command hell, silence, stop. And hell calms itself. Hell does not have power over Jesus. Jesus has power over hell. Jonah is thrown into hell, but God brings him out through 3 days and chucks him onto the lake, onto the beach edge. And then the Revelation reading where it says there's no more abyss. It's not talking about water. It's not saying there's no more ocean and there's no more surfing. John is saying there is no more hell. There's a new heaven and there's a new earth and there's no more sea. There's no more hell. The abyss has gone. So essentially this image of water that we find in Scripture, very often, not every time, but very often, is associated with hell. And the question we have to ask ourselves is when Jesus engages with it, or somebody does something, is it because we're meant to understand it as a metaphor for hell and the power that God has over hell? A little thought for us would be, what is it that you are going through, and where is it that Jesus now shows power over those things in your life that he sometimes we can look at our sin, we can look at our addiction, and we can think to ourselves, these are the most powerful things in our lives, that living hell. But actually Jesus comes and shows power over them in our lives, and Jesus comes to bring about freedom. And in that story of Jonah, we all get thrown into hell, but Jesus comes and carries us through the abyss and brings us out and spews us onto this new heavenly beach. Beautiful image, a lot more to be said about that, but something just to be thinking around. Jesus walking on hell, Jesus having power over death itself and over hell itself. Just a thought. Grace and peace.